I'm recording my homily for the 27th Sunday in Ordinary Time for 2019. And I'm running really late again. These last 2 weeks have just been so incredibly full that getting my homily recorded has been pushed to the back burner many times, so I apologize for that. Also, I've had a cold, so if I start coughing, that's just part of my retinue right now. So last week I talked about the gospel of Lazarus and the rich man, right? So you remember the story of Lazarus and the rich man. You have this rich man, he has everything, life is comfortable, life is nice, and it seems to imply in the story that he's totally at peace with the fact that him and his family and whoever is in his inner circle is very comfortable with life. They're not suffering really at all. But even at his front door, you have Lazarus, this poor man who's suffering, right? And the one thing that's clear about Lazarus is that he suffers, okay? Now, Lazarus goes to heaven. The rich man goes to hell. Lazarus, now the temptation in all of this is to think, well, if the rich man had just been a little more generous, he would have gone to heaven too. But that's not the message that really comes out. Lazarus goes to heaven because he suffered. It's not because he did anything great or magnificent. In some ways, you just get this feeling that for God, it was the fact that he suffered, and it seems to imply on some level that he was innocent. He didn't necessarily cause his own suffering. It doesn't really say, but you just get that sentiment, right? That he wasn't necessarily to blame. And the rich man could have done things, he could have, but the one thing he didn't do that seems to be implied in the whole story is he didn't suffer. He wasn't willing to enter into the suffering of the poor man. That doesn't necessarily mean he needed to take his suffering away, but he didn't suffer. He wasn't willing to abandon his comfort, his life of comfort, for the sake of someone who was suffering. One goes to heaven because he suffered. The other goes to hell because he did not. Right? Okay. Now, this week, I want to take that kind of to the next level, if you can even imagine that, because that's pretty significant as it is. The next level is the willingness to suffer and not expect something back, right? The willingness to be able to give of one's life completely and not necessarily expecting something in return. Because what do? We say, okay, Jesus, I'll do all this suffering, but I'm banking on the fact that you're going to give me heaven. You're going to give me something. You can imagine true holiness is when one doesn't even expect that. Say, Lord, it is enough that I can give of myself completely. And we all desire heaven, but irregardless, to say, irregardless, I want to give myself 100%. Now, let's tie it in with the gospel for this week. So the gospel this week, the disciples are asking for faith. Lord, give us faith, right? And Jesus says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you would say to this tree, be uprooted and go into the sea, and it would obey you. Now, obviously, he's not being literal about us going around commanding trees and telling them to walk into the sea. He's talking about the power of faith. That faith can move mountains. Faith can do incredible things. It can transform people when we have no hope, if you will, in a natural sense of anything happening, that supernaturally anything is possible if we have faith. Do we see that kind of power? I have to say, for most of my life, I never expected that. I think in some ways we all just kind of settle, right? It's like, Jesus, I'm going to have all this faith and I'll get this much back from it. I'll get this much will happen, right? Maybe something little will happen with lots of faith. But Jesus says if you have little faith, humongous things, massive things will happen. Powerful things. And so I want to reclaim that desire and the expectation that, again, if I have true faith, God can do amazing things through that. empowered by that permission someone gives. And so I think it's the nature of the willingness, again, to give of oneself 100%, even in little things, but 100%, and really trust God in that, and be joyful about it, and then expect that He's going to do something powerful. He's God. He desires to do powerful things. When I was coming up with this homily, I was trying to think of powerful things, right? Just even in the earthly sense. And I just came up with this really dumb one. But it just struck me. So when I was a kid, I was the one who was mowing the lawn most of the time. And we had this lawnmower. And this lawnmower was older than dirt. This lawnmower hated to run. It didn't want to run. It just wanted to sit in the garage. And when I'd pull that lawnmower out in the spring, it would take forever to get that thing going. And then get it going, right? And I hated it. So I was always telling my mom, can we get a new lawnmower? And she was always like, as long as it runs, we're not getting a new lawnmower. So I was always tempted when she said that to like put sugar in the gas tank or something, just to put it out of its misery. Yeah, it never went out of its misery. So the name, actually this lawnmower had a name. It was, painted on it. It's called the Wizard. The Wizard. It was anything but magical. But this Wizard, when it did get running, would cut the grass, manage to cut the grass. Well, I grew up in Texas, so we didn't really have a lawn. We have a couple blades of grass, right? But you have these rocks every once in a while. And this one time, I was mowing the lawn, and I hit this rock. I hit this really big rock. And this lawnmower launched this rock out the little discharge hole, right? I mean, it launched it. It went like over house and crashed through some trees. And I was like, wow, this thing has some power. And I was so impressed by it, I actually started liking the lawnmower. It was like, wow, I can't throw a rock that far. And this piece of junk lawnmower can. Dumb example of power, right? But when we see power, when we see something that's impressive, we're like, wow, that thing is doing what it's meant to do, right? Now, do we have any expectations of faith? Is it like a tool? Is it going to do something powerful? Or do we just have this glimmer of hope that one day maybe something will happen, right? Confidence. Confidence that Jesus wants to work powerfully. And then to behave in accordance with that. To believe that that's what Jesus wants to do. Not that we set up our own expectations. We say, oh, you know what? I want this, therefore Jesus must want. Not that kind of faith. But we put ourselves out there. Now, I mentioned a tool like a lawnmower. I think of ourselves in some ways like a tool. And when we really are doing what God wants us to do, when we're living by faith, there's powerful things happen through us as a tool. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were talking about, I forget what we were talking about, but at some point I said, do you want to be a saint? And they're like, yeah, I want to be a saint. Great, you want to be a saint. Are you willing for Christ to take that cross, though, and bury it into you, press it into you, mark you with it? I mean, just bury it into you so that you can become that saint. And it's like, whoa, right? That shouldn't necessarily intimidate us. It shouldn't cause us fear. But realize there's going to be a surrendering that must happen, a willingness to sacrifice, a willingness to suffer for the sake of anything that God is doing, and a desire for it, a hunger for it. Not a hunger to just suffer, but a hunger for God to work powerfully and allow His cross to be buried into us, to dig into our flesh and our bones and our mind and our soul and mark us with it, right? And so the cross is the number one tool that Jesus uses And he wants to then transform us into a tool that he can use in this world. We have to desire it and surrender to it. Allow him to do that. The other aspect of this true faith, this powerful faith, to have this powerful faith, in this surrendering, is a willingness to fail. So, the Stations of the Cross, right? You pray the Stations of the Cross. Station number 3, station number 7, and station number 9. Jesus falls. He falls the first time, the second time, and the third time. We know we're really carrying our cross when we do fall. And I don't mean fall into sin, but I mean just fall. I mean a willingness to say, it's not by my strength. And so even Jesus Christ, as he's going down this path, he's setting an example, a path of saintliness and holiness, he falls. He's crushed under its weight literally of the cross, right? And so to not be surprised, to not be shocked, and to have the humility to say, okay, I'm going to fall. And I'm okay with that. But that's not going to be a reason that I'm not going to push myself to do what God wants me to do. And so obliterating the fear that might come from that. And so being okay with that, right? Now, a little while back I was talking with this homeless gentleman. He shared with me a little bit about his story, and I think I've talked about him a little bit. He said when he was 5 years old, he was basically abandoned by his family. At this point, his parents already had lots of issues, drugs, all kinds of bad things. He was basically abandoned, and he started bouncing around from his grandparents to his aunts and uncles, and family members just would take care of him, but nobody really wanted him. And you can imagine at this age, the resentments and the anger that would start building in a young man, right? And how that anger could make it difficult for a family, and you know, somebody, if they got an angry little child, at some point they're just going to say, you know what, I don't really want you. Especially in a dysfunctional family, right? He said by the time he was 10, 11, 12-ish, he was already carrying a gun. And he said he wasn't carrying it because he wanted to hurt people. He just had nobody to protect him. At this point, he had already been hurt really, really bad. As he said, I was just going to defend myself. He ends up doing some really bad things, and he goes to prison for a long time. So I'm talking to him just about his philosophy of life. If you ever want to hear a really, really real philosophy on life, just talk to a homeless person. Talk to somebody who's been on the streets a long time. Their sense of life is just different. You think of Lazarus, right? How he processes the purpose of his life when he's been abandoned. People should have loved him, didn't love him. What is his purpose of life? So I'm talking to this gentleman, and now he said his purpose in life basically is to defend innocent people, especially around homelessness. If somebody's getting bullied, if somebody's getting robbed, if somebody's getting mugged, if somebody's being treated in a way they shouldn't be treated, he's going to defend them all the way. He says he doesn't care. If he ends up going to jail, if the police come and he sends them, he doesn't care. He's going to do what he believes is right. Now what you hear in that is, that's what he wanted when he was younger. He wanted that hero, that person who would come and defend him, that person who would come and love him enough to sacrifice anything, even going to jail, for the sake of protecting him. And he didn't have it. And so he wants to become that person. I can't help but admire the power of his conviction. Now, I don't necessarily agree with everything there, but I can't help but admire the power of that. So often in our lives, right? So often in our lives, living our faith so superficially, we don't have that kind of conviction. You say, no matter what, I'm going to do the right thing. And just have the potency of that conviction. I think that's what Jesus is getting at when he talks about just a little bit of conviction transforms things incredibly. One person who lives with that kind of conviction impacts the lives of so many other people. Just want to give you a little example, a little story. So, St. John Vianney, patron saint of diocesan priests, he, last number of years of his life, he basically lived in the confessional, hearing confessions 10, 12, 14 hours a day. And he loved his people, and he loved hearing confessions. But even for him, there were moments where he felt like he just reached his limit. And he's just kind of going to snap. And I don't mean just emotionally, but just overall, whether maybe he was receiving spiritual attacks. But these 3 times, which is interesting, kind of like the Stations of the Cross, right? These 3 times where he tried to escape. He tried to escape from his parish, from his parishioners. And he loved them, but sometimes it was just overwhelming. And there was this one particular time where he decides to flee in the night, and so he gathers up some of his belongings, a few things, his breviary, his prayer book, and he sets out in the middle of the night, and he's walking away, and he just wants to go off to a monastery or something, and he collapses on the road because he's so weak. And some of the people from the town see him lying there, and so they come and they pick him up, and they take him back, and they sit him back down in his confessional. And he never tried to escape again. He fell. One of the greatest saints we have, and he fell. But he lives life so powerfully that there was so many opportunities where he could have catered to the opinions of his fellow priests. He could have catered to the opinions of the town people when they were rejecting some of the things he was doing. But he's just so passionate about bringing Jesus that he endured incredible things, even failing him inside himself at times, and then surrendering once again to that cross that was being buried into him, and carrying it then, as he kind of has this renewal of faith, carrying it with great joy and moving mountains with it. By the end of his life, he was hearing something like 100,000 confessions a year. That was the context. That was the way Jesus wanted to use him as a tool for something powerful. All right. Jesus desiring to use all of us, right? In the right sense when I say that. So I'll see you next week, and hopefully we can continue to be praying for each other and growing in our faith. God bless.